Hello, everyone. My name is Aaron Christensen. This is Horror 101 with Dr. AC, celebrating classic horror throughout history with new episodes every Friday night. 1991's The Silence of the Lambs is that rare beast that is both mainstream Oscar-winning success as well as a first-rate horror film. A masterful blend of psychological horror and physical violence, screenwriter Ted Talley's Dynamite script, adapted from Thomas Harris's best-selling novel, examines ambitious young FBI trainee Clarice Starling, played by Jodie Foster, and her efforts to track down the serial killer Buffalo Bill, a nickname he's earned by skinning his victims. Assisting her with his own cagey agenda is imprisoned serial murderer Dr. Hannibal Lecter, played by Anthony Hopkins, dubbed Hannibal the Cannibal for his unsavory habit of consuming his victims. Director Jonathan Demme handles the action with a sure touch, mixing character, complex plotting, and locations that have a feeling of absolute authenticity. Repeat viewings reveal what a careful craftsman he is, and even the most superficial glance reveals how much pop culture's fascination with serial killers and crime scene pathology has been derived from this film's popularity. Thanks to Hopkins' exquisitely modulated performance, walking a tightrope between sneering intellectual superiority and barely restrained animal urges, Lecter arrived as one of the screen's most electrifying fiends. So memorable is he that it's easy to overlook Ted Levine's carefully shaded performance as Buffalo Bill, which is a feat unto itself. Despite his limited screen time, Hopkins won the Best Actor Oscar, with Foster capturing Best Actress, Demme Best Director, and Talley Best Adapted Screenplay. Unsurprisingly, the film's success revived interest in 1986's Manhunter, which actually served as the cinematic introduction of Lecter, with Brian Cox memorable in the role, as well as two future installments featuring Hopkins: Hannibal, 2001's direct sequel to Silence of the Lambs, and 2002's Red Dragon, the same source material that had inspired Manhunter, as well as a 2007 prequel, Hannibal Rising, and Brian Fuller's network television series, which ran for 3 seasons. Clearly, our fascination with the chilling world of Hannibal Lecter has yet to run its course. So, who's ready for dessert? It's time to celebrate 35 years of The Silence of the Lambs, and we have an incredible panel to chat about it with me. Let's bring everybody in, and let's say hello to Mark Easted.
Hey, everybody.
Mackenzie Parker.
Sorry. It rubs the Mackenzie into its ears.
My favorite other AC, Anna Sergioli.
Quid pro quo, Dr. AC. Quid pro quo.
Beaming in from the West Coast, Frank Merle.
Happy to be here.
And rounding out the dinner table, Mike Mayo.
Greetings all.
And we're going to be chatting about The Silence of the Lambs from 1991, celebrating its 35th anniversary. And we'll also be talking about its prequel, Manhunter, 1986, celebrating its 40th anniversary. We'll be talking about Hannibal from 2001, celebrating its 25th anniversary. And we'll also be talking about Red Dragon for 2002, Hannibal Rising for 2007, and the TV show Hannibal, which ran from 2013 to 2015. And we're going to be talking spoilers. So it's a very, very rich meal we've got going. So let's get to it. Mark, let's go ahead and kick this thing off. How did you come to Silence of the Lambs for the first time?
I'm old enough. I saw it in theaters. I was excited when it came out. Didn't know what to expect. Serial killer movies were not nearly as, prevalent as they became after it. But I can remember literally right from the opening scenes of her running through the training stuff in the woods. I felt uneasy. Some of it was the music, which really played a good part, but I was like, what am I in for? And I was in for a treat, and I've loved it ever since.
Were you familiar with the novel beforehand?
No, I did read it after, but no, I hadn't read it before.
Great. And Mac, how about you?
I'm, I guess, young enough that I first experienced the movie as the poster and the box on the VHS shelf in the horror section. And I think it chilled me a lot because it wasn't just like a flashy Friday the 13th box. There was something like, it's confusing because it's like there are bugs, there are lambs, there's like, and you don't have any sense of what's going on based on. So it gave me like a real this is for like adults. This is an adult horror movie. And then I moved when I was a kid, and while I was moving, it was playing on TV, and I kept alternating between Lambs and Dick Tracy, so my parents wouldn't know that I was watching Silence of the Lambs. And then I read the book when I was 11, and then my mom let me see the movie. And then it's my favorite movie. It's my number one favorite movie.
Well, glad to have you here to celebrate it. Anna, how about you? How'd you come to this one?
It is also my favorite movie. I cannot remember exactly when I saw it. I was born in 1990, so I was not seeing it when it first came out. I think I was in my late teens when I saw it, and I adored it. I loved Clarice. I loved so much about the movie. I related to a lot of the things that are shown in the movie. And then I became really I loved this movie, but then the whole franchise, I got into the other films. The Hannibal TV show is up there with Twin Peaks is tied for my favorite TV show, not counting The Simpsons. So I just adore Silence of the Lambs, and nothing else in the franchise has done exactly what that movie did, but there's still a lot of gold in the Hannibal world.
And Frank, how about you?
For me, it was the Academy Awards. I remember watching the Oscars every year with my parents, and I was a kid when this movie came out, but it swept the Oscars. This movie won Best Actress, Best Actor, Best Screenplay, Best Director, Best Picture, and I remember going, Mom, Dad, what's this Silence? I mean, it must be a great, great movie. I was 11 or 12, and they said, after it won all those Oscars, my parents were like, okay, you can watch the movie. And it held up. It deserved all those Oscars. Yeah, one of my favorite movies of all time.
And you were already a horror fan at that point.
Yeah, I mean, that was the thing that I grew up watching, Halloween, Friday the 13th, all that stuff. So to see these actors and actresses in their tuxedos and gowns with these gold statues for a horror film is what really was like interesting to me. And I think that was probably a watershed moment in our culture where horror really became elevated to that status.
And Mike, how about you?
I was familiar with the books. That's how I first ran into Thomas Harris. I remember with Silence of the Lambs, I was reviewing films for the Roanoke Times, and I lived in Washington. And so they had the MPAA had a wonderful little theater down on I Street where they would bring in all of the previews for the critics to see. And I remember sitting, as I always did, in the back row and watching it and being really knocked out. I was already a fan of the books and of Harris in general. At the time, I didn't realize it was going to be as rewarded as it was. But I think from what everyone else has said here, it is not an exaggeration to say that Silence of the Lambs is kind of the height of the horror movie in popular culture. No other movie that I can think of has been so honored and stands up so well. I have probably watched this movie now 5 or 6 times. I find something new in it every time I look at it.
For sure. I had the same experience watching it this time around. I was like, I never picked up on that before. So that was really cool. I came to this actually, I'd seen Manhunter back in 86, 87. And I remember being really knocked out by that. And I sought out the book Red Dragon. And then when I heard Harris had another book coming, I followed up, read Silence of the Lambs. And so I was excited to see what this movie version was going to be. As everybody has said, it is just kind of a next level type of movie that the acting is so great. The direction is so incredible. The score is fantastic. Being familiar with the novel, it's an amazing adaptation, very faithful. And a lot of the great lines that are in the movie come from the book, but then there are some where Ted Talley gives it an extra spin and you're like, wow, that's even better. Well done. I'm super excited to chat about this one. And I feel like it really is just kind of one of those, it's the experience itself, but there's also just all these little moments within it. We can start off by talking about Anthony Hopkins, because he's kind of become the face of the franchise. He brought Hannibal Lecter into pop culture in a way that, say, Brian Cox did not. When we talk about Anthony Hopkins' portrayal of Hannibal Lecter, what are some of the descriptors that come to mind?
The extreme intelligence, of the character. There's something frightening to think that somebody can be that smart and want to eat people, right? That immediately makes you lean in. But something else that's, the movie, you talk about how good the direction is and the screenplay and the source material. All those things help. Now, it's interesting that we have, Manhunter to sort of compare a different performance. We also later have the TV show to compare a different performance. But in Silence of the Lambs, so many things work to help Anthony Hopkins, right? And so nothing against Anthony Hopkins. It's a brilliant performance. But there's so much talk about him before we meet him. There's so much lead up. There's so much fear is instilled. And we all remember the first shot. Right, it's Clarice's point of view leading down to introduce him in his jail cell. So there's a lot of cinematic choices that really help that performance. And he's a gentleman, right? And so there's a lot going on there.
Yeah, he's a gentleman until he isn't, right? Like he asks the uncomfortable questions. Anna, how about you? What are some thoughts about Hopkins?
The character itself is a combination of the most polite figure of class and civility who's doing the most uncivilized, inhuman things possible. And I feel like the way Hopkins really ties that into his performance is he always stands in a very, like his poses are always very composed, sophisticated. He has a beautiful voice. His voice itself is velvety and really appealing, and he's perfect in terms of he never misspeaks. Everything he does is intentional and measured, and you feel that. But at the same time, then he'll surprise you by saying something incredibly crass, like suddenly roughened your nipples, didn't it? And you're like, oh my gosh, like he's just, I think what's happening with Hopkins is he's, his eyes even glow, and you're falling into his performance, especially since he has Jodie Foster to play into. And then when he reveals that if you for a moment give him any leeway, he will be the most barbaric creature possible, is so fun. You want to see it. You want to see if you can catch it.
Mark, how about you?
There's definitely so much that Demme does to even up the performance, but I've read quite a bit from Hopkins and some of the things. Like, so he compared himself to Hal the computer from 2001 as being like this kind of all-knowing character. Like, he knows everything. He knows what you're thinking. He can smell everything. He just knows what's happening all the time. And then he also based his performance a bit on reptiles, which is stand very still and you only blink when you want to. So he blinks a few times in the movie, but it's always consciously and on purpose. So it just makes it super intense. Like, no one stands still while they talk to you. They're moving their arms, they're moving their head. He doesn't do that. And if he does, again, he's doing it very purposely. So it just, super in control, super intelligent, and you think you might have the upper hand on him, and you never do. Or very rarely. He obviously got caught, but and it's also the least amount of screen time for someone who has won best actor. I think it was like 16 and a half minutes of screen time, or 21 minutes or something like that. But it's or 20% of the movie is all that he's in, but it stands out. Yeah.
Well, and that voice, I mean, I'm not sure what the accent is because he keeps kind of playing around with it, but there's such a quality to the Hannibal Lecter voice. I remember I recorded the audio of just Hannibal Lecter's dialogue, and I've listened to that like hundreds of times. So I have all of Hannibal Lecter inside my head, just like Jack Crawford says not to do.
And I don't know if it will help you, but he also did say his accent was a mix of Truman Capote and Katharine Hepburn.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's kind of, it's kind of this strange mid-Atlantic. It's not his voice. It's not a true accent. And he adopts Clarice's West Virginia accent from time to time to mock her. Mac, what are your thoughts on Anthony Hopkins here?
Well, Anthony Hopkins, partly because of this movie, is and always has been one of my favorite actors. I followed him like a band over the years. I know his fallow periods. I know what it looks like when he's trying. I know what it looks like when he's not trying but having fun. It's such an incredible performance. It's brilliant because it's a character that suggests such violence, but he's inside of a cage all the time. Like his threat is like, is so ephemeral. Like you can't like put your finger on what's so scary about him just being in his presence. But like, it's like being around a tiger. You don't know what it's gonna do. I heard Anthony Hopkins once say that he chose to do the voice of Hal from 2001 because he'd heard Albert Speer, the architect of Hitler, say that being around Hitler was like being around a machine, and he thought that he'd give it Lecter a machine-like quality. But then he did say that although I think something is ticking away inside of Lecter, that's human and feels something.
You talk about like he's scary even when he's completely captured. There's something supernatural, I feel like, about him. Like the fact that he has such a heightened sense of smell, the fact that he has like such brilliance in terms of intellect and can exhibit physical violence really, really effectively when he is given the opportunity to do so. So there's something about him that makes him monstrous. And you recognize that he's in that cage, that specific cage, for a reason, and they take all the precautions for a reason.
Whenever I go to watch Silence of the Lambs, I always in my head I'm like, oh, he's gonna be like really big and that crazy, like kind of what he gets to in the other movies and sort of what he's parodied for. But like I'm always surprised in Lambs by how like he's so focused and he's so still and there's not as much of that like wild, more theatrical level that he'll get to.
Except for when he's killing the guard, right? So we get to see a different side of him. And he's
right.
like, it's almost orgasmic with the blood and everything. And I mean, he's, when we talked about his accent and mid-Atlantic being a fake accent, it really does. You start to get the sense that everything, his whole persona is put on in order to, like, the real Hannibal Lecter is when he's killing that guard. And that may be the only time we see the real Hannibal Lecter. Like everything else is put on in order to manipulate someone.
Mike, what are your thoughts on Anthony Hopkins here?
What struck me the most recent time that I watched the film was how beautifully it's set up. Before we see him, we've heard him talked about, but when Clarice goes into the first meeting, and first, she meets the doctor who's, just such a terrible person who makes Hannibal look good by comparison. And then going down into that dungeon, following her down the steps, into that long hall. And then at some point in there's a wonderful 360 camera movement which I believe is right before she gets to Hannibal's cell. By that point, you are ready to just accept anything. I mean, you know something really big is coming because it's such a great setup. And then that scene, their initial meeting, again, that's as good as movies get. It is just so strong, not a wasted word or motion in it. And my favorite line in the whole movie, "I'll help you catch him, Clarice."
As you say, we're leading up to him, and we go past all the other inmates who are down in this lower depths, and then we come across this well-composed gentleman who's articulate, and we think, okay, well, maybe they've made a mistake. And over the course of the 5-6 minutes that we encounter Hannibal, we like, oh no, he's really, really dangerous. Leading up to that famous line about the fava beans and the Chianti and that inhalation that he makes. By the time we get to that point, we are terrified because we've been set up to see a monster, then we don't see a monster, and then a monster is eventually revealed before us. It's an extraordinary reveal by Demme and Hopkins. And now's the time to talk about Jodie Foster as Clarice Starling, because it's not the showiest performance. When you see a Best Actress performance, we have an idea of what that looks like. Jodie Foster does not fall into any of those traps. It is a very composed and subtle performance, feels incredibly authentic.
Again, that's something that really came to me seeing it again. Now, the stuff we all know about, she's always surrounded by these larger men who are threatening her. That's part of it, but she doesn't depend on that. I mean, From the very moment we first see her, we know that this is a very determined, disciplined character who's going to do whatever it takes to get her job done. And she never strays from that all the way through. To me, it is one of the most realistic performances I've ever seen. Hopkins is acting, but we don't see it because he's so convincing. I met Jodie Foster on the street. I would think, yes, this is what a young FBI agent would be like. And one other thing, her West Virginia accent is letter perfect.
Yeah, and apparently, she was pulling way back, and Jonathan Demme's like, no, we need to hear it. The next take, she just turned it up a notch, and it was perfect. It was always there inside.
Well, Matt talked about following Anthony Hopkins like a band. I followed Jodie Foster I'm such a fan. Everything she does, just brilliant. And so to put two of the greatest living actors together, you're going to have a good movie, right? Jodie Foster is in this character. Yeah, she's a young FBI agent, but man, she's a mess internally, right? There's so much going on inside. So Hannibal Lecter picks up on all that. So, how many meetings do they have in the movie? Is it 3?
It's
3. Within 3 scenes, he's picking her apart. He's figuring her out. At some point, probably we'll talk about the title, the brilliance of The Silence of the Lambs, and that the metaphor, the story, the backstory with her character's childhood. So much is unspoken, right? And so just her presence, and she comes in. She's a little bit afraid of Hannibal Lecter, right? On the other side of the glass, she's more afraid of being figured out. That's what makes you lean forward and watch this movie again and again, is the character arc. And this beautiful scene at the end when he calls her and asks if the lambs have gone quiet yet. That's just a credit to, of course, the screenplay and the source material, but it's a credit to her performance. There's so much interior life.
Something that I think is really remarkable that Jodie Foster does in this role is she plays a character who is professional, a bit reserved, who clearly compartmentalizes stuff and is ambitious, but she's still entirely warm and likable, and you root for her. And I don't think that's easy to balance, but she accomplishes that. And it's true to, I think, the character she's playing, where Clarice, we think about the scene where she finishes that horrible interview with Miggs and Hannibal and then keeps it together to cry at her car. I think we get the sense through the writing already that she's a character who compartmentalizes. And I think Jodie Foster really shows that in her performance. I've read the book, so I know inner workings, but no matter how many times I watch this movie, I'm not exactly sure about what her feelings are about Jack Crawford and Hannibal Lecter. And I think that's great that I've seen this movie 15 times and I'm still not exactly sure, because Clarice has so much trauma, and the way that Jodie portrays it, I think, is that she keeps things to herself. But we have Hannibal Lecter who forces her to be frank in order to succeed. And that's the only reason we even know these things about her. And she only reveals what she has to. And so I think she just does a great job of doing a performance that could easily have been cold and not fun to follow, but she's so easy to root for.
I think it's especially a hard part to make sympathetic for a woman, and especially for a woman doing that performance in 1991. Where when a woman is playing someone ambitious and driven and not soft, it often would get looked at as well, she's a bitch, and not that she's a tough chick kind of way. So to make it someone who is like this, but you still really want to know about and you care about and you want to succeed, is kind of a testament to her performance. And I did read actually that the crying scene was she was shadowing a female FBI agent, and she suggested it. She's like, it's what I would do. She's like, sometimes the job gets so horrible, you just have to have times where you let stuff out or you're not going to make it. And no, you don't do it in front of other people. You do it in the car or whatever, but you gotta, or you'll explode. Even if you're compartmentalizing, you need to let some of it out. And also just in some of the things I've read about it, where she was able to go with ad libs and situations that happened. So supposedly it was not in the script where Hannibal Lecter picks on her for being a rube and about her accent, and that she really felt like this is a really good actor who's making fun of the accent that I'm doing. Like, I'm not doing a good job. And that you could see it in her reactions. Like, there's a little bit of like, ooh, that was not nice. And I didn't know it was coming, but she just went with it. And then the scene where he's in the cage in Baltimore, right in the height of it, some guy on crew dropped a big wrench, and you can hear a bang. And Demme was like about to call cut, but he's like, but she just went with it and didn't stop. And then when the scene was done and he said cut, she was like, what the hell was that? But like, she just was able to stay in it. I just noticed, and I probably noticed that other times, but in the finale, I've never seen anyone look as legitimately scared as she did. Like her breathing through that entire final scene when she comes down to the basement. Like, how do you keep going in a performance like that, where like you have to keep your heart rate up and you have to breathe and it has to feel like it is real? And it is how you would be, even if you're trained and doing the things you're trained to do. Inside, your heart's going to be beating, your breathing's going to be speeding up when you don't know what's going on, and just an all-timer.
Last night, I watched the movie and was thinking about how difficult it must have been, particularly for her and Hopkins, to give those performances while staring mostly at the camera, like Tak Fujimoto's lens. Like, usually as actors, you want to have each other to play off of, and they really didn't have that because they had to, and then yet they gave those performances, which is so crazy. Clarice, that character and her performance, Jodie Foster, I know she brought a lot of baggage with her to that. That was that time in her life when she had gone to school, and like the movie feels like it's almost her in a way, kind of saving young women from. I mean, she even said, there's a quote I love from her where she said, it's about a young woman trying desperately to save another young woman. And she has to deal with the obstacle of all of these men. Like, that sums her up in a lot of ways. But I love how vulnerable she is, yet how resilient she is. I think that has to be so hard to play a character who's knowledgeable but doesn't know everything yet. She's seeking information, but she still is like this powerful character. And I have met Jodie Foster, actually. I met her once. I didn't say anything about this movie to her because the last thing she needs is a 6-foot monster going like, my favorite movie is The Silence of the Lambs, So I kept it to myself. But she has a real presence. She feels like a really smart college professor or a librarian or something.
And let's talk about the movie itself. I mean, it is about a serial killer who is kidnapping women and skinning them. And as we come to learn, is creating a suit of women, that he can slip into. And that whole concept of transformation that is so, prevalent throughout the movie. It was on this most recent viewing, Clarice Starling is trying to transform as well. She's coming from this background, this poor white trash background, and she's trying to become something else and leave that behind. It really struck me, and it had never struck me in that way before, that this is a movie about these two characters that are pursuing one another. How brilliant to get all of that in the movie and to not make a big show of it. This is what this is about, but we don't have to talk about it. We don't have to mention it, such that I can watch this movie 20 times and then finally get it.
The whole transformation thing had been so important in Red Dragon.
Yes.
And so I think in a way that the stage had been set so that they didn't have to hammer it home.
Let's talk about the plot itself. And I'd like to also just talk about Ted Levine as Buffalo Bill / Jamie Gumb. Hopkins delivers such an incredible performance that it completely overshadows what Ted Levine is doing. And Ted Levine is delivering such an all-star performance. And I feel like one of the reasons why Ted Levine was not nominated was because they were promoting Hopkins in both the Best Actor and the Best Supporting Actor races. They knew he was a supporting actor just in terms of screen time, but he's also such a presence that they were promoting him as Best Actor as well. So I feel like that's kind of what got Ted Levine shut out, to my regret, because I think Ted Levine could have also taken home an Oscar as well.
The dual performances of Hopkins and Foster. There's also the dual performances of Levine and Brooke Smith. And everything I've ever read about or heard about it, like they bonded a lot over that movie and in giving those performances, and were like very like they were dancing a lot between takes and stuff, which like gives me so much relief because she is so tormented in the movie. And there's nothing else in his filmography that's like it either. That's what always blows me away. Everything else, he's like this barrel-chested, like he's got a big mustache. It's just like I can never see James Gumb in anything else he's done, and it's such a amazing performance.
I know that Ted Levine did a lot to prepare for the role. He had a lot of he actually has said in interviews he saw and heard a lot more than he wanted to when meeting with behavioral science. He also went to a drag show in Chicago, and so something that I think he really tried to bring to the role is this is from the book where the dying words of Buffalo Bill are, "How does it feel to be so beautiful?" And when Ted Levine went to the drag show, he was talking to a drag performer asking, like, "Why do you do this?" And the performer said, "Well, when I'm in drag, I'm a beautiful Latina woman. When I'm out of drag, I'm just like a Puerto Rican punk." And we'll talk, there's a lot I have to say about kind of the trans identity in this movie. Suffice it to say, protect the dolls. But I think that's something that Ted Levine is at least trying to admit in how to perform what he was given in this role, is that he's trying to transform into someone beautiful that's worthy of love, because he sure hasn't seen it his whole life. And what an interesting contrast to Clarice, who almost the only value that she's externally given in this film is that she's beautiful, and she's almost trying to like prove a point past it. It's so interesting that you see where his goal and her goal and where she's at is it's just so interesting to see that play out. And I do think that Ted Levine had a lot of intent with how to portray a really complex character.
I mean, the fact that Ted Levine and Brooke Smith are both, known for their stage work more than their film work, that makes sense to me that those two would have bonded over that relationship.
There's only, again, it's a character with not a lot of screen time, right? The structure of this movie is such, we're mostly following Clarice. It's a detective story, right? And so she's trying to solve this missing girl case. What's interesting, a lot of the times that we drop in on the Buffalo Bill side plot, we don't know where we are, right? He's in hiding somewhere with a kidnapped victim. And the majority of this movie is us trying to, along with Clarice, figure out where he is and try to get to him. What they choose to show us when we do drop in on him is a big reason why that part is, again, so powerful and why it works. But can we talk about the song, right? What is the song?
Goodbye Horses.
Goodbye Horses.
Jonathan Demme discovered that band too.
I heard it recently. I was at a Starbucks and it came on. And I was like, you can't not picture Buffalo Bill when you hear that song. It's incredible. So, but also the dog, is it Precious? Yep. Right? He loves that dog, right? So you get to see that character's vulnerability. I mean, he really cares when she's able to kidnap the dog and turn the tables on him. It's really sort of fun, for us to see him, with her having control over him in that moment. You say that performance has been overshadowed, but I think as time has gone on, put the lotion in the basket has become such a meme. It's become such a part of culture, right? So I actually think that time has been very kind to Buffalo Bill.
What I think is interesting, I think both in the Red Dragon story and Manhunter and this, both of the serial killers were influenced by Lecter. And they are both wanting to change, but they're not changing into what they really want to be. They're changing into what he is trying to make them be. Lecter even says, he's not a transsexual. He thinks he is, and that's entirely his fault in how he treated him. He was playing with them. It was an experiment. Now, he even said it's, think of them as an experiment. So they're desperately wanting to change. They're wanting to find the acceptance and the love, like Anna said, but he has steered them entirely wrong. And so to kind of portray that, there's this terrible person doing terrible things who might have turned out a little differently if he hadn't met this person. He would probably still been a mess doing bad things, but it might have looked different. I do have to say he did play one other really evil part that I love, and that is it's a 90s thriller, not nearly as good, I think it was 2001, Joyride with
Sure.
Paul Walker and all them, where he was the voice
Candy
of Rusty
Cane.
Nail. Yeah, Candy Cane. And initially the voice had entirely been done by Eric Roberts, and they were just like, something's not right. And then they got Ted Levine and they were like, that's right. So like just his voice. And the dancing scene that is so famous was not in the script. It's in the book, not in the script. And Ted Levine was like, we need to have it in here. Like it defines my character, like for the audience. And so we need to have it in there. And they said, I think you're right. And then just one little trivia, the house that he lives in, when they were scouting it out, he was super surprised to find it was in the town he grew up in. And it was the house next door to his high school girlfriend's house.
Wow.
So just like this weird little connection that you're just like, that's funny.
I love that.
It is such an unusual performance that it could be, in the hands of lesser actors and directors, it could be comical and it could be really dated. But as we've all been saying, absolutely the opposite is true. It has become, part of the film itself. And there's nothing in this movie that does seem dated or wrong, that you look at it now and say, oh, they really shouldn't have done that here. Everything just fits together so well. And his performance, it's apart from everything else in the film, but again, it just fits what the story needs. And this is one of the most solidly constructed scripts, as you were saying, taken almost directly from the novel, that you'll ever see in just a classic 3-act structure, how it all breaks down and one piece follows another. Just astonishing.
And I'd like to bounce back to you really quick. You were talking about some of the controversy. This was a movie that was picketed because it was coming out at the same time as Basic Instinct, or the same year rather as Basic Instinct. And so there was a lot of concern over how marginalized characters were being represented in film.
The Buffalo Bill character, of course, is a composite of Ed Gein and other serial killers, where instead of him creating a woman suit to become his mother, which is what Ed Gein was up to in there, it's coming from a place of just storytelling and fiction. But the issue, of course, is, something that was cut from the movie that was in the book is a scene where Jack Crawford goes to an institute that is performing sex reassignment surgery, gender affirming surgery, and is just getting ripped apart. Like, how dare you? Like, these are victims. They are not people who are out committing crime. You are about to put like a witch hunt out for all of these people. This is exactly the stereotype we're fighting. Like, and it's not even true. That was cut from the movie. Demme has talked about maybe he would have done things a little differently. But what's interesting too is in talking to trans people and reading reviews of trans people about this movie coming into today, there's a lot of differing opinions. Some people really are just, this movie is such an example of the evil queer character, the evil trans character, a trans woman who was assigned male at birth is violently fighting to become a woman. And then other people are like, you know what? I don't see that person as a trans character. The whole movie is saying he's not even trans. And I actually have seen a drag show where Detox, who is a trans woman who is on RuPaul's Drag Race, she does a Goodbye Horses scene where she's doing the Buffalo Bill dance. So there's even a certain reclamation of this movie in the trans community. And basically what I've realized is there are a lot of different takes and they're all valid, and it's just important that we listen.
Excellently put. I think that's always a concern, is when you have one character representing, there's only one of them in a movie, and you go, well, is that what the filmmakers are thinking of that particular group of people? It's also just a matter of like, this is the story that we're telling, and it happens to be the story that Thomas Harris was telling. But I agree. I think it's handled really sensitively. I think Ted Levine works very hard to humanize James Gumb, even as this broken person who is trying to heal himself in a questionable way. Obviously, we can relate to what he's trying to do, even though we don't approve of what he's doing.
Just for
Now-
the record, Harris is gay.
Yeah, Harris is a gay man. And I think, one of the things that we can applaud is that he does an excellent job of providing a feminist standpoint. Like, this movie is very much told from a female character standpoint, and it feels pretty authentic.
I've also done some reading in the same, seeing a lot of people, even within the queer and trans communities, having different takes on it, and generally people not really arguing about it, but like, it all makes sense, and let's, kind of keep talking about it, and that's what's important. But for 1991, I would say it was better than almost anything else you were getting. Whether that's that's not necessarily a good thing, but at the time you would mostly have just had the issue with that person is that they were trans, or they were a cross-dresser, and
Right.
we had those in the 80s, no question, some slashers and other ones.
And just to underline what Anna was saying, in the book, that is a very important scene where Crawford goes, Johns Hopkins that he goes to, I think, to discuss the whole trans business there. And I can see why they didn't make more of it in the film, simply because of time. And it kind of, stops the story. But he makes it quite clear in the novel, being trans has nothing to do with this.
Right. Jonathan Demme is kind of our mastermind behind this. And when I think of Jonathan Demme's filmography, it's hard to pin him down as any one kind of filmmaker. He grew up in the Corman stable, but immediately kind of came out with his own voice. But his voice is not so distinctive that you're like, that's a Jonathan Demme movie. When I was looking at his filmography, I'm like, oh, that's right, he did that as well. Oh, he did that as well too. And it just feels like he makes good movies. That's
Yep.
the stamp of Jonathan Demme. What are some of the moments that he creates that make this movie sing?
The close-ups on faces they're framed really well, and it helps when you obviously a lot of times you're framing Jodie Foster and Anthony Hopkins, but I noticed this a little, but definitely read about it too, that he intentionally, when he close up on Jodie Foster, she is looking at the camera, and when the men are looking back at her, they're looking just off camera, trying to make it so that you continually still stay in her perspective and not theirs. And I don't think you notice it so much until you read about it, but you feel it even though you don't know why you're feeling it. Like, you feel very centered in her perspective, even though it's not always directly that way. So I noticed the close-ups a lot this time.
When you hear that about a filmmaker where you go, well, I can't tell from one movie to another, he'll work in a different genre, or I can't quite tell what that filmmaker's stamp is. That, to me, that's the sign of someone who's maybe not an auteur, and I don't mean that in a bad way. He's just very, very good at the craft of filmmaking, and so many little choices that go on, right? So every little thing, you could talk about the shot sequence or, the music choices, but the acting, right? The director is guiding these performances. One of the most important jobs for a director is tone, right? And for a movie to have a distinct tone throughout, from one performance to another. And I had talked about the structure of this movie where we jump in and out of we're either with Clarice or with Buffalo Bill, and yet no matter who we're following, from the opening shot of this movie through the end, we know what movie we're in, and that just takes a really good director. And being a filmmaker myself, I know a lot of times you're throwing so many things together. Like, this little piece over here might have been the DP suggestion. This little piece right here might have been an ad lib. You just never know. So I'm not one to point out a moment and say, oh, well, that's brilliant directing. Directing is handling all these pieces and making something beautiful as a whole.
I think overall, the thing that I take away the most about this movie is I think it really captures what it's like to be a woman. I mean, I'm an inch taller than Jodie Foster, so I'm a little bit taller, but like so many of the scenes that are in it, I'm like, yeah, that's what it feels like. Like the scene where she gets in the elevator all by herself. That's been me so many times, especially with like when I'm at a courthouse or something like that. That's been me so many times. It does feel like that. And just the way that it was filmed. And Mark, I think you were pointing out the different camera angles that were used to accomplish that feel. It just really, I really think the way this movie goes reflects an authentic experience. And I don't think that's easy to do, and I'm impressed by it. What makes this a horror movie instead of just like a procedural movie, I think it has to do with the building of suspense at certain scenes. Like it's almost overdone when they show Hannibal staring at Dr. Chilton's pen. We haven't seen him unhinged yet, and we're excited for it. And then when Clarice gets to Jamie Gunn's house and the choice of showing some of the angles that are behind him in the kitchen where she can't see the gun, there's a lot of really good suspense throughout. And some people say that this is a love story. And even though it's all of these interviews that should be fluorescent lights and stuff, there's something about the lighting and the setting that is almost romantic lighting, and then the intimate in-camera angle. So I think there's a lot of things that just make this exceptional in terms of what's going on behind the camera and in the direction of everything to make the scene.
And Mac, you're an editor by trade. I can't help but think that you have some thoughts about like how this movie is assembled.
To answer the question about Demme and to cover that as well, I don't know about you guys, but at the beginning of the movie opens on a shot of a dead tree with like gray sky, and then the titles are like black with white outline, and it's like boom, and they don't fade in. It's just like Jodie Foster, Anthony Hopkins, Silence of the Lambs. It's sort of inelegant, and then like she goes to the through the FBI offices, and there's nothing sexy about those offices. It's like painted cinder block. When you get to Hannibal, the FBI offices are like a perfume commercial. I heard Jonathan Demme once say that the story to him is like a modern day knight versus a dragon story, because she has to descend to fight two different dragons, like one with her mind and one with her brawn. And it's like what makes it modern is that it's a woman and not a man. I think Jonathan Demme brings a lot of humanism. I think that's the through line of a lot of his movies, his focus on very sensitive moments with people. Even with Lecter, there's a moment I always love that they bother to keep in, where the camera's on Hopkins, and it's when he's turned away from her, when he first does the like, when you were orphaned, like what did happen with your uncle, and she talks about how her mother had died, and like all this stuff about like that made her alone by the time her father died. And there's a look on Hopkins' face. It's one of his deliberate blinks where he gives this look of like, oof, like that this maniac is like empathizing with her is so lovely. And then, yeah, there's just so much focus on her reaction. Anna talks about like how it makes you feel. It puts you in the perspective of a woman. And I think a lot of that is like the weird looks that men give her. There's that, even when she's walking down the airport terminal after they kick her out, after George Romero kicks her out, like there's a man that passes her in front of her and like looks at her as he's passing, and she registers it. And it like, and even in that moment where she's so defeated, there's this moment where she can't escape some dude just checking her out, you know. With editing, there's a lot of just moments like that. Howard Shore's score plays a really big role. My favorite shot in the entire movie is when they're starting to pull her away, and Anthony Hopkins stands up, and the camera does this like sweep as it follows Hopkins when he says, "Brave Clarice," like that moment. And then Howard Shore's score like swells, and it does feel like a wizard just like sending her off on her mission to kill the dragon, you know. And it's so powerful.
I would like to mention one thing, that one scene particularly that we haven't talked about, and it's one of my favorite scenes in the movie, and that is the storage unit. When she finds the car and the head and all of that. That is one of the moments that really makes this a horror film, that because you don't know what's going on there. It's the dark and stormy night. Is the door going to fall down on her? All of that. That is just a brilliantly constructed scene. And again, every time I watch it, I'm looking for all the little details that I've missed before. It could be just a throwaway, and it could be made into more than it should have been. But it just really fits perfectly as a building block to move the story on to the next step.
My best friend and I bonded over this movie because it's both of our favorite movie. And there's the part where she's getting under the door and she says, if this door should fall down or anything else, right at that moment, me and my best friend turned to each other to go, did you know that she says the heh like is in the book, the hee like, and so like that was a big moment. I love that scene. It's like the psycho stuff is in the storage unit.
Yeah, and one scene I know, especially when I saw it in theaters, is when they pull the switcheroo on you, where you think that the FBI, Crawford and all the guys are going to get him from the house. Rings the doorbell, he finally answers, and it's her, and you're just like smacked across the face with like damn, like she's here all alone, and she does not know that this is the dude, and so then you kind of get sucked into it with her. Of this final moments of like she's that they're 400 miles away, like no one's coming soon, and she's got to handle it, and you got to go with her into that basement to face the dragon. And the moment the open door opens and it's her, I remember being in the theater and being like, oh shit.
And isn't that funny? Because I mean, like that is, as you pointed out, Anna, like that's one of the most suspenseful sequences where we see the cross cutting between the doorbells ringing and it's them, pushing the doorbell outside. And we've been told they're in Calumet City, Illinois. She's in Belvedere, Ohio. But somehow we are conflating it in our head because that's what Demme's doing for us. And then we're like you said, Mark, we're like, oh no, that's right. We knew that information, but we forgot it because of the great filmmaking that's happening there.
Since we're talking about that moment, there's a brief little weird thing that I've always noticed and I read something about, and it's when she pulls her gun, right? When she puts the pieces together, she figures out this is Buffalo Bill. She's in a lot of trouble. The take they used, she sort of fumbles a little bit. If you remember when she's like, FBI, you're under arrest. And, and it takes her a little extra time to get her gun out. She hated that take. They had a bunch of takes and all the rest of them, she did it like a pro. And they went with the take that she fumbled because there's more humanity in that take. And she is a rookie. And this is a very intense moment. And I don't know, I've always just remembered that moment. It just felt very human. And I love that they went with that take. Yeah,
because I was rereading the novel and she draws it like a pro. And she says freeze with a period, not an exclamation point. Like she's handling it like super cool. And I agree. I love this version of Clarice. She's not used to facing down a serial killer.
But my I had read that was an editor choice, that happened later, that was actually a blown take.
I think it adds to that moment adds to the nightmarish feeling of it. It's like if you were having a dream where that was happening, you wouldn't be able to get the gun out of your holster because you didn't pick a chamois leather holster or whatever. And it's like it feels so like, no, get the gun out,
And it's such a moment too, where so much of this movie is about Clarice and Hannibal. For all the immaculate physical things about Hannibal, we see Clarice having her imperfect moment. For Hannibal being from the wealthiest, most educated backgrounds, we've got Clarice, who's poor West Virginia. One of them is an FBI trainee, and one of them is a terrible serial killer cannibal.
Well, and something that jumped out at me this viewing, and again, I've heard this movie a lot. When he says, "This is the Belvedere scene from the Duomo." Wait, Belvedere, Ohio. He has known this from the very, very beginning. And I was
telling her,
AC, oh my God.
No, Anna, I had the same experience. I was like, he gives it to her. He's messing with her from the very beginning. And I think kind of to somebody's comment earlier, that's what turns Hannibal Lecter on, is messing with people, is throwing things out there and twisting them around and giving them half-truths so that they go spinning off and then he just sits back and watches. I mean,
he plays with his food.
Exactly. He plays with his food. Well said. We haven't mentioned Jack Crawford yet. And Jack Crawford is somebody who, shows up throughout several of the movies that we're going to be talking about in a moment. Scott Glenn's incarnation of Jack Crawford, I really enjoy. I'd seen, Scott Glenn in a few things at that point, but I'd not seen him take on this kind of role of gravitas and kind of a nurturing. You have two kind of father figures here. And, he's definitely the benevolent one.
This time around, especially, I noticed that maybe he wasn't as nice as I remembered. He's a little bit manipulative. He uses her from the beginning.
Yeah.
He's using her without telling her why he's doing it, or misleading her about why they're doing it. And when, she calls him on it and he's like, well, this is why, but it's just an excuse. He doesn't apologize, and then the stuff where she again calls him on the way that she just, dismissed her around all the West Virginia cops. And he was like, well, I was just trying to get rid of the sheriff. And she's like, yeah, but it matters. Like, people will follow your lead because you're like the big man on campus in these situations. But, I'm hoping that meant that as he continued along with her in a relationship, that he would start to see those things and start to treat her like an equal and not like a piece to use. Even Hannibal questions, like, is there some kind of sexual or whatever feelings from Crawford? And I think for Clarice, it doesn't matter because she doesn't. She looks up to him, but it's like professional, and that's a father figure. And it meant a lot to her when he said at the end, that your dad would be proud because, basically he is standing in for her dad. I guess she got that approval from both dads in the movie. Like Hannibal was kind of like, yeah, like, you brave Clarice. Like, he genuinely thinks that he drew that picture of her. And one of the reasons I don't like Hannibal is because he wouldn't have come for her. Like they said at the end of this, it's something that always bothered me about Hannibal, is that he interacts with her again. But that's just me. But yeah, Jack Crawford wise, it was different for Scott Glenn. And I've always felt it's a little bit of a cold performance, but I kind of think maybe that's on purpose.
What Anna said about, this movie, really is like the experience of living in the world as a woman, right? And so if this character represents the good father figure, but he's emotionally distant, that made a lot of sense. That moment you talked about, Mark, where it was a teachable moment for him. I think that he means well. I think he does. He can be better, but he's not touchy-feely by any means. And I think that there's some tough love there, and I think he sees her as somebody who is destined for greatness within the FBI, and so he's going to put her through these paces to get her there. But I don't think there's a judgment call one way or the other about whether he represents a good father figure. He just represents a real world father figure.
I agree with all of that. And something so different about Jack Crawford, the book to movie, is in the book he has a lot more to work with. He has a dying wife. There's a lot. Jack Crawford has several chapters that just don't even appear in this, because that's really not what the story is about. I think that was actually a pretty wise editing choice, that's not what we're talking about here. That's not the point of the movie. I think it would have taken a lot away from the movie. Crawford's hard to read. He's using her, but he trusts her. He's helping her, but he's learning from her. But the moment that I think is the best performance that he gives in this movie is the scene we were talking about, when there's the switcheroo where you realize that he's not in Calumet City, he's in Belvedere, and just the reaction of just Clarice, where he realizes, and you see he really does really worry about her and care about her. And that's the most memorable moment of the movie for me, because there's so much leading up to it. You're like, does he even care? Is he just using her? And so that was the moment where he finally reveals, no, he's cared quite a bit about her success all along, and cares about her as a person all along.
What Anna said about the subplot about his dying wife, which is really very important in the novel and goes a long way to explaining why he does some of the things that he does. And it makes him a much more sympathetic and interesting character. But you're right, it would not really help this movie, the story they're trying to tell. If they were to do this again as, say, a limited series, maybe you would have time to add that dimension to it.
Yeah, I mean, we do see it in the Hannibal TV show. That aspect of his life is introduced and is addressed.
What else can be said about Scotty Glenn? He's my later in life model, because if you Google him, he's still like doing pull-ups and like he's a martial artist and stuff. He's incredible. I love Scott Glenn. He's I think just casting him does a lot of the work of having to say things about Jack Crawford. I remember in an interview, Jodie Foster emphasized that Scott Glenn was a Marine, and I think he brings a lot of that energy to Jack Crawford without there being my favorite moment of his performance, I think, is after the moment we were talking about earlier. The go on now, let's take care of her. That moment, when the camera like swings over to Scott Glenn, and you see he has like a smile on his face, and it's never brought up. It's never made anything up, but like you see him having just watched her do that, and he's like, yeah, that's right. I need a 6-part link up or whatever. And like, he's charmed by what she just did. And like, it's such a cool, subtle, smaller performance, but like so perfect. I mean, he's like the bricks in the FBI offices. You just believe that guy is the head of the FBI.
Within that same scene, I love how they all pass the Vicks Vapo Rub around. You don't know what they're doing, and then you recognize what they're doing, and Demme trusts you. Like, he just does it, passes it around, and everybody's standing around with the little white stuff under their nose.
Everybody but Bob the Goon. Everyone but Tracy Walter, because he's a weirdo.
He can handle it.
The only 2 false moments I find in the whole movie, and that hasn't aged well. And one of the specifics I'm blanking on, but it's when they talk about serial killers in general and try to get us to understand that perspective. And I think it hasn't aged because now, since this movie, serial killer stuff is everywhere, we all know a lot more about some of these general ideas about them. But the one I think of particularly is when they're watching on the news, all the FBI students, Catherine, or Senator Martin talking about her daughter, and she's keeps saying her name. And then, Ardelia is like, oh, that's so smart. Like, she's trying to make, look at her as a human. And to me, I was like, in other ways, we're just talking about how Demme trusted the audience. And those moments to me always felt like he didn't trust the audience. And it felt like, well, here's this information because you won't know it. So we have to kind of shoehorn it in there. So I don't know if it was the script or the way it was shot. And there was one other moment that I can't remember, but it was the same thing. It was like, here's some information about serial killers. And those are literally the only false moments I could find in the film. So I don't know if anyone else felt that way or if it was just me.
I agree. Sorry, go ahead. Who's that?
That's me. I disagree. That it was made in 1991. The serial killer wasn't the cliche that he's become now. So yes, people did need to know that information.
It does feel. I agree with Mark. It does feel a little over. It feels obvious in how it gets introduced into the movie. I think it could have been done in a more elegant way, because that I agree with you, Mark. Like, that always feels like that's somebody dropping that in so that we understand what we're seeing.
And that was a rewrite from the book. The conversation in the book is Senator Martin was saying how she's very high up in the government. She's even involved in the space programs. And they're saying, oh, that's smart. A lot of people with certain mental disturbances believe that there's like some sort of an alien interference watching over them. Oh, that's smart for her to make it seem like she could really help them, whether they have a problem with the government or the aliens. So right. I maybe it would have been a different experience for you if they kept the original writing. But the one thing that I'll always forgive about that scene is it's got Ardelia Mapp, and I want more Ardelia Mapp all the time. Give me more. She could have been a more important character in the movies.
I always love that part when they're running together. Number one, that shot of her running, like booking it down the hallway is amazing. But I also love that. Yeah, but I also love that shot of them running together when they run past that group of dudes, and you see the dudes kind of go like, but like just them together is amazing. Yeah.
Mark, I have one other moment that struck me as false, and it had never struck me as false before. There's no way Jack Crawford would be leading the task force down to Calumet City. He's gotten booted off this case. Like, he is pissed off Roger Corman, and he's going to be riding a desk for the rest of his life. Yeah, I was kind of like, I was just like, wait, he wouldn't be anywhere near Calumet City.
Also, I've been to Cal City. There are not hills like that in Cal City. Let me tell you, I'm like from around there. I got friends who live there. I know Cal City. They don't have hills like that. No.
Yeah, well, I think they filmed most of it around Pittsburgh because they had all different kinds of terrain. But they probably.
Isn't it amazing that this is like this beautiful prestige movie, but then like B movie celebrities like Roger Corman and like Charles Napier is in it. Yeah, just like it's
love
so
it.
cool. I also love that the
Precisely.
movie becomes I love that the movie also becomes about those like cops on the first floor for like 15 minutes. It like drops Clarice and just becomes like
Oh
these
man.
guys movie for a bit.
And I love the guy who plays Sergeant Tate. Like
The mustache.
the mustache is incredible, the voice is incredible, and I'm like, I'm following this guy. Wherever he goes, I'm behind him because he's incredible.
I think he's one of those real guys that like they hired him because he was like, like Full Metal Jacket.
Yeah.
I'm sure this will help segue us to the prequels and sequels talk, but it is something to think about too, that this prestige movie, this 5-time Oscar-winning movie, is an adaptation of the second book in a series. The first one had already been made into a movie.
Yeah.
And so in some ways, Silence of the Lambs is sort of a sequel / reboot of something that already existed. A lot of people knew Hannibal Lecter from Manhunter, so take that as a segue.
Do we think a lot of people knew Hannibal Lecter from Manhunter?
So Manhunter was not a popular movie.
It flopped. Yeah.
Yeah.
So did anybody come to Manhunter before Silence of the Lambs other than me?
Yeah, me.
Mike,
I
you did?
might have. I remember seeing it on VHS, but I
Right.
don't remember if it was pre or post. I feel like it was pre. I didn't see it in theaters.
Well, here we are. I mean, what are people's thoughts about Manhunter? Because I hadn't revisited it in a while. And while I think it is clearly a movie of its time, I really like the style that Michael Mann is delivering. Like, it is a movie about, here's Michael Mann's vision. The music in all of these movies is so kind of key. And we talked about Howard Shore's score, but Michael Mann's use of music for Manhunter, I think, is incredible. And it's kind of indicative of what he's doing. Do we like Manhunter? Do we not like Manhunter?
Like it, yes, I do. The one thing it does prove to us is that William Peterson is no Jodie Foster. He's fine in the lead, but really doesn't work all that well. Remember, this came out right after Mann had become a real star for Miami Vice. He had had that on TV for a long time, been very successful, and that's why they gave him the reins on this one. And I found it interesting that the one clear choice he made that was different from Silence of the Lambs and from the book, Red Dragon, is to have Lecter's cell be upstairs. So that and I think he did it because he wanted that long scene of Peterson running down that circular stairway when he's, just completely freaked out. But to have Lecter kind of up in this eyrie as opposed to down in a dungeon is, to me, just kind of a wrong decision.
It's a fine movie. It's very 80s. And it's it's a police procedural. It's much more, in some ways, to compare the two plot wise, right? They're very similar. You have a cop who's trying to catch a serial killer and has to go to Hannibal Lecter to get some clues, right? In that sense, I've sort of seen this type of movie. I sort of know where it's going. There's a creepy bad guy. The good guy with the gun is eventually going to get him. And it's really fun as a cinephile to compare Manhunter to Silence of the Lambs to then Red Dragon to see what, when we talked about the brilliance of the direction of Silence of the Lambs, well, here's an example of another director putting as much as he can to make this not a typical police procedural, but comparing the stories of Red Dragon to Silence of the Lambs. What's the key difference? You made the lead female, and that does so much. That elevates Silence of the Lambs beyond. So I don't think it's a fault of the lead performance, let's say, in Manhunter. There's just so much you can do with that material. I think Silence of the Lambs is such a better story in a lot of ways.
Well, it's funny because we're going to be talking about Silence of the Lambs versus Manhunter, but I think also Manhunter versus Red Dragon, and then some of that also translates into the TV show.
Well, like Frank said, this is a procedural, and I think I do like Manhunter, and I think Manhunter is trying so hard, and I think it succeeds. It's trying so hard to tell a story about a man trying to save his family and other families. All the victims are nuclear families comparable to Will Graham's, and we know Will has terrible trauma and he's trying to heal and recover with his family. it starts with him building a sanctuary for baby turtles and ends with him seeing that the turtles mostly were okay. I adore the scene where he is having a really frank conversation with his son about mental health. To see a scene like that in the 80s of a man and his son having a very frank conversation about mental health and getting treatment for mental health being a good thing to do. We're talking about serial killers. This is a conversation that should be allowed. And so that's something that's so different about the approach of this movie is it's very tender in the central approach. But all that being said, I do love the in a gotta be and they play the whole 17-minute song because of the setup. But the scene that always stands out to me in this movie is, and this is a scene that I saw on the Hannibal TV show, and I saw it in Red Dragon. I still think that the Reba with the tiger scene in this movie is the most intimate, beautiful scene. It doesn't even have the right to be so beautiful given, what's happening, but it is such an intimate and beautiful scene that I just adore. I think there's a lot of really good things about this movie. I like it.
Mac?
Yeah, I love this movie more probably every time I watch it. I remember, it's definitely shaggier than Silence of the Lambs. I know they ran out of budget by the end, and that house at the end was a lot of metal plates and stuff that were just kind of abstractly, but I love Mann's style. I love that kind of cold atmospheric sensibility that he has. I think I still prefer Silence of the Lambs because I think Demme, the difference between Demme and Michael Mann is that Demme is he makes his characters all different things, and for better for worse, Michael Mann, his characters are kind of one thing, but very good at that thing.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I enjoy. It's fun to just compare, Anthony Hopkins to Brian Cox because they're both such accomplished actors, especially now, and it's cool to imagine what would Brian Cox be like, doing Silence of the Lambs or vice versa. I've also seen the TV show, and they do Red Dragon. The arc of Red Dragon sort of gets covered in the third season.
Yeah, that's his third season. Mm-hmm.
I'm in largely preference. I think Red Dragon is a fun popcorn movie version of this whole world. Yeah, I don't know. Tom Noonan is so great. He's so chilling but sensitive at times, and I love him. But I also love Emily Watson. She's great.
One thing I really noticed this time around, and it made me think it's something about Mann, especially his 80s work with Miami Vice and everything. Even though it's very colorful, it's very neon soaked, but it felt like a noir to me, especially the first third of the movie. Even though it's that colorful instead of black and white, it still leads to a lot of shadows and a lot of play with light. The music was very noir. Peterson's narration, where we sit with him and he's just talking to himself into the tape recorder, and it feels like a narrator, the hard-boiled PI who's narrating his hard-boiled story. It's kind of quintessential 80s, but in a good way. I don't feel it's dated in a sense because of the style, but it also is this is the epitome of that time period. In a good way, and that so much of this and Silence of the Lambs are what all the 90s serial killers movies hoped to be and stole from. And I guess you could go back to that's really Thomas Harris, I guess, but they all stole from these two to do that. And yes, Into the Garden of Eden is still creepy, but also is one of the greatest moments in The Simpsons when Bart slips it into the organist
in the Garden of Eden.
20-minute solo and then flops down.
Good pull, yes.
I also then very much noticed this. I watched Hannibal after I watched Manhunter again. Ridley Scott to me was the wrong choice, but so was David Mamet writing the script. Hannibal had no style. Manhunter was so much style, and Silence of the Lambs was so elegant in the way that Demme directed it, did what was needed for the story to make it even better and better. And then Hannibal felt like a 90s thriller that you could throw away. That's how it felt to me. And Hannibal Lecter is scary when he's caged. He's all potential. the potential violence, the potential, like, what is he going to do? And when he's not caged, he's just Anthony Hopkins, who's really not very scary. He's a short old man. And so once he's out of the cage, he's not nearly as scary, but that's partly the story's fault. I don't think the book is nearly as good as the first two. But yeah, so I've always loved Manhunter because, again, I can remember seeing it on VHS and at 17 or 16, like being this is so cool. Haven't seen the show, and I saw Hannibal Rising in theaters and never again. And I don't intend to watch it ever again because I thought it was somewhat of an abomination.
I would like to do just kind of like a little free for all. We're talking about Red Dragon. We're also talking about Manhunter. They did Red Dragon like the year after Hannibal. So they bring Hannibal back after 10 years. And then they're like, well, we got to get Anthony Hopkins playing Hannibal in Red Dragon so that we can have our quote unquote trilogy. What are people's thoughts about Red Dragon?
One thing that's interesting is there's the same cinematographer for both Manhunter and Red Dragon. So Dante Spinotti, he's the same cinematographer for both, which I'm like, really? Obviously, the director of Red Dragon is a terrible, horrible person.
His latest movie is Melania.
I just saw that today. I was like, wait, what? What's Brett Ratner been up to? It's like, oh, he's doing this. Okay, great.
Red Dragon is not a tender movie about families. It is not a procedural. This is, okay, Hannibal Lecter is a character who needs to have more attention and screen time. And I do like Red Dragon. I do like the movie. It's true to the book. There's a lot of different things. It's just telling an entirely different story. And they are making sure that the dynamic between Will Graham and Hannibal Lecter is really explored a lot more. We haven't talked about Brian Cox so much, but I thought that one of the things that's so creepy to me in his performance of Hannibal is it's a small thing, but his mouth is just a little bit open a lot of the time. It almost feels like he's breathing you in, but also is just ready to bite at any moment. And I think that, God, he did do a very good performance, but Anthony Hopkins really did make the role famous, and now we get him back with Red Dragon.
Well, it's funny because I get the sense that Brian Cox's version of Lecter is really, really, really upset that Will Graham caught him. You know,
Yes.
and I don't get that as much with Hopkins. I mean, I think Hopkins is, as you said, Mac, I think this is one where he's just enjoying his paycheck, enjoying playing at Lecter, as opposed to inhabiting him the way he did in Lambs. Cox feels petty. Cox feels like you should not have been able to catch me. I know I'm smarter than you.
But as Will Graham says, you're insane.
What do we think about Edward Norton as Will Graham?
I think that Edward Norton is a lot more vulnerable on the surface of his portrayal of Will Graham, whereas I think Will Patterson is vulnerable, but with a big shield up because he's been so injured. And so I think those two performances play really differently, and they're both enjoyable, valid choices.
I think I favor Peterson's portrayal because I like the veil. Norton feels like I'm showing you everything, and Peterson is showing you as little as possible. And yet, I mean, within that coldness, kind of to your point, Anna, like we do get that sense of tenderness. Like this is a broken guy, but he's only broken. He's not broken toward his family.
I really liked Ray Fiennes, though. I thought he was
he's great.
Really good.
He's great. I have no pity. He's great.
Two scenes I really loved from Red Dragon that weren't in Manhunter. I don't know if they show up in the TV show. Is where he goes to the museum and eats the William Blake painting. That's a great scene, and Ray Fiennes is awesome in it.
It's in the show as well.
That's in the book.
And actually, they did do the other one in Manhunter, but I liked it better. The burning of Freddie Lowndes scene and the thing coming, him coming down in it, I think was done better in Red Dragon. I liked them both, but I thought it was more effective in Red Dragon.
It was Stephen Lang, the guy who plays him in Manhunter. Oh, we didn't touch on Dennis Farina as Jack Crawford.
When Dennis Farina and William Patterson are talking in a scene together, their Chicago accents are
Yep.
They start dueling. Yeah.
I mean, a lot of this panel wants to talk more about Manhunter than to talk about Red Dragon or Hannibal, because there's something weird about those two movies. They feel like cash grabs. Anthony Hopkins is not as good as Hannibal Lecter in either of those movies. Another series of films that I want to compare this to, Pirates of the Caribbean. Pirates of the Caribbean is one amazing movie and a bunch of attempts to recreate magic. Johnny Depp as Captain Jack works because he has very little screen time. When everybody loved that character, so they Hollywood likes money, so they make sequels. They give that character more screen time and to diminishing effects. And so the same thing happens in Hannibal and then in Red Dragon, where it's like, well, hey, we know you all loved Anthony Hopkins as his character. He seems to have fun playing the character, so let's all make a lot of money by letting him play the character. So they added as much screen time as they could, and the more we see Hannibal Lecter, the less compelling he is. And I would make the same argument about Captain Jack Sparrow in Pirates of the Caribbean.
We've mentioned money, so we should probably talk about the big figure in that aspect behind this franchise, which is Dino De Laurentiis. I know the story is that he kind of went to Thomas Harris after Silence of the Lambs and was like, you got to write another book, like, or we're going to do it because we own the rights. Like he has the rights. And I think, I don't know, that book, Hannibal, I read that when it came out. I still have the hardback cover copy of it. I was so eager, and it's so problematic and weird. And you want to talk about editing? Early 2000s Audis editing, they do all this stupid stuff in that movie where it's like, before they, like, between scenes, they'll do these quick cuts of like these like weird like close-ups of things that in between scenes that are supposed to like freak you out or something.
And then slow-mo as well. We get both.
Yeah. Post-production slow-mo, so not even filmed in slow-mo, but like done later, so there's that jittery effect. Ugh.
Our post-Gladiator Ridley Scott.
Yeah.
And I agree, Mark. I don't know that Ridley Scott was the right person for this. I'm not quite sure how he got the gig.
It's so weird to think that he came off of Gladiator to this film. I mean, because this movie it's not well directed. There's a lot of problems with this movie, and it's hard to believe it's the same director as Gladiator. Like, it's his next project, right?
Right.
So to go from Gladiator to this, that's a head scratcher.
The book is hard to read because, I mean, the whole story is just, we all have been rooting for Clarice this whole time. You know what happened to her 10 years later? She's set up in a way that she can never succeed. She's becoming the scapegoat. She is becoming a pariah. And she gets so utterly broken that in the book, she gets drug-induced brainwashed and ends up becoming Hannibal's lover. In the movie, they at least don't give us that horrible end. But still, you never get... I don't think she's going to be okay. And it's so hard to... I love Clarice, and I'm like, I try not to recognize Hannibal as canon because it's too hard for me.
It's also really inelegant compared to Silence of the Lambs in the way that men are portrayed. Like in the Silence of the Lambs, there's like a wide array of misogyny. Whereas in the Hannibal, it's all just like, hey, fucking Starling. Like, it's just all very like broad and crazy in a way where you're like, well, that's not even... Nobody talks like that.
Title VII exists at this point. Like there's legal sanctions for this. Like,
Julianne Moore, we should mention. I mean, it's not her fault. I mean, it's a very difficult ask to take over a role as good as Jodie Foster as Clarice. But I mean, she's up against not as good a screenplay. I mean, it's 10 years later. It's such a mess. Hannibal is a sad sequel.
And I think we can understand why Jodie Foster might not be attracted to this story, this project, but I love the character of Mason Verger. I feel like that character belongs somewhere else.
Hannibal TV show is where he belongs.
In a much better
They do
movie.
him better. In the book, Mason Verger has a sister whose hair has it's where Thomas Harris kind of jumps the tracks with like any leeway you give him for Silence of the Lambs for like the
Being
trans
sensitive,
stuff, like kind of goes out the window with Hannibal and the sister. I think the movie Hannibal wisely cut her, and then the TV show like fixes her in a way.
I should say I've only seen the first season of Hannibal. I've not seen the other two seasons yet, but
Mason Verger is a wonderful, wonderful part of the Hannibal TV show. But Gary Oldman's Mason Verger is not just a great character, but I mean, some of the most incredible effects makeup I think I've ever seen in a movie.
Yeah.
So incredible.
And
I heard he was doing an impression of Thomas Harris. that accent. That accent that he's doing Cordell.
no one else has mentioned Hannibal Rising, and maybe there's a reason, but I was like, all right, you already made him way less scary by getting him out of his cage. How do I make him even less scary? Give him a backstory.
Well,
why do we want backstories of like Michael Myers and Hannibal Lecter? We don't. It's never going to live up to what he became. Did anyone else think it was just straight terrible, or did you just not see it?
The
Well,
worst
I
was
also read
the
the book.
story.
Yeah, I was just, I didn't understand why you're making him justifying his psychosis. And because everything he does in that movie seems perfectly justified coming from a place of vengeance, as opposed to just he's insane.
I was
Yeah,
bored during that
bad.
film. I
bored.
didn't
It's
think it
like-
was compelling.
It's a bummer. I think like I know that's really the one where Dino De Laurentiis was like, "Hey Harris, either you write this or we write it," and he was like, "Okay." And yeah, it is just draining every last bit out of that franchise. Yeah, it doesn't even make sense either because it's like he's forced into cannibalism, so now he's
Right.
into cannibalism. It doesn't make any sense.
He was forced to write both of those books. That's the bottom line, right?
Mhm.
He
Yeah.
didn't want to write those books, but he did.
Yeah,
I wish he had written them differently. I'll say that.
yeah, really.
Frank, did you have some thoughts on the TV show?
No, I have not seen the show.
Okay.
I have not seen it either, but if we're talking about Thomas Harris books,
Yes.
let me recommend this.
Carrie
this is
Mora?
a book. Yeah, Carrie Mora. It is very much in the style of, or the characters are much the same as he's written about before. It's a terrific book. I can't recommend it highly enough.
I just got the audiobook today, so I haven't started
Nice.
it yet. But from
He's-
watching these, I was like, let me look up what his latest is.
He started as a crime scene reporter, didn't he? Isn't that kind of where?
Yeah,
a lot
well,
of
and
his-
then Black
AP.
Sunday was his first novel, I believe. And Black
Right,
Sunday is
yeah.
terrific. Not the Mario Bava film, but the
Yeah.
one with the giant Goodyear blimp attacking the Super Bowl. But it's, I just revisited that movie and I was like, oh, that's right. Thomas Harris. How about it?
said that he regrets doing these sequels.
Yeah.
In recent years, he's kind of said like, maybe it wasn't the best idea.
Well, Anthony Hopkins likes money and that's, that's okay.
He's got his house up in Malibu. He seems happy.
Well, let's circle back around. Give us your final thoughts on particularly Silence of the Lambs, but also kind of the enduring quality of Hannibal Lecter and these characters.
I think we've covered so much. I mean, this is coming from a filmmaker. It's hard to make a great movie. All the pieces have to come into place. You start with a great screenplay. You need great casting. You need all the crew to be at the top of their game. It's a miracle when a movie turns out as well as Silence of the Lambs. And to top it all off, it's a horror film. That's amazing. And the fact that none of the sequels or prequels live up to it, it's like helps to prove how hard it is to make something as great as Silence of the Lambs because they couldn't do it again.
Mark.
I thoroughly agree. It's an all-timer. One of the 3 movies to win the Big 5 Oscars, and again, a horror movie. And it's one of the 2 horror movies that everyone keeps trying to make not a horror movie. That and Jaws, even though I'm like, name 2 of the scariest characters in movie history, Hannibal Lecter and the shark. You were scared, right? And you were meant to be scared. It's a horror movie. But yeah, you can't beat it for what it is.
This is the movie that gave us the wave of 90s thrillers instead of horror movies. Well, we can have it, our cake and eat it too. We don't have to call it a horror movie. We can just call it a thriller and have all sorts of horror elements. Mac.
Man, I mean, I wouldn't be the person I am without having seen this movie because it was the first time I started to differentiate. It was as a kid between performances and, oh, that's good writing. And, oh my God, they're looking at the camera and like noticing things like that. So like, and that's what made me want to make films myself. This movie I owe so much to. I think it's a brilliant film. I'm very interested to see how it goes on to age. I'm interested like in 20 years if it's going to have like that classic Hitchcock feel, where it's like, because if it's set in its time when the fashions have all kind of gone away and stuff like that, what that'll feel like. but I love it. It's my favorite movie of all time.
And Anna.
Adore Silence of the Lambs. My favorite movie. You have both one of the best characters in Clarice and one of the most horrible in Hannibal Lecter, and yet here they are making such a compelling film together. When you look to the Hannibal brand as a whole, there's definitely some hits and misses. Silence of the Lambs is so powerful that we still are getting content today. And I'm going to once again put it out there. The Hannibal TV show, Brian Fuller does an amazing job of creating his own story with Will Graham and Hannibal that is, I will argue, comparable to what you get with Clarice and Hannibal. And it's one of the most beautiful TV shows. And if you like to cook, go watch it already.
Anna, I am definitely going to watch the Hannibal show now because you said that.
It's fun. It's like Mads Mikkelsen. He's not trying to one up Hopkins. He's doing his own thing. He's great. Like, it's fantastic.
Each episode has, a dish that Hannibal is serving up to a guest. It's a lot of fun. I'm not a huge fan of TV in general, just because I like more story versus characters. But after, I completed the first season, I was kind of reflecting back on like, there's so many great little moments. Somebody could pull that together and make a nice little movie for me. I deeply appreciate it. Mac, get on that, would you?
Yeah, I love Lawrence Fishburne as Jack Crawford in that show. I think he brings a lot to it. There's a lot of Shining references in that show. You could kind of probably cut it down into.
If you took out like the murderer of the week aspect of it,
that's what nobody likes. It's like, because it's like, why are there so many serial killers in Baltimore?
Thanks so much, everybody. It's been a great conversation. Here's to 35 years of The Silence of the Lambs, and looking forward to having you all on again very soon. And until next time, keep searching, keep exploring, and keep sharing the scare.